Bob Anderson, principal owner of inLearning, a consultancy dedicated to helping manufacturing executives build great places to work. And today, I welcome you to our webcast entitled Unlocking Shop Floor Engagement, where we merge the worlds of human resources and manufacturing with the insights of two industry giants, Jason Lauritsen and Scott Smith. Today, we are zeroing in on the art of engaging employees in the manufacturing sector, a realm where both of our guests have left significant marks. Jason Lauritsen, the visionary behind the Check-In to Thrive method, brings a wealth of experience from his roles as an entrepreneur, corporate executive, and employee engagement researcher. Known for his groundbreaking books such as Unlocking High Performance and the development of the Check-In method, Jason's work serves as a beacon for managers seeking to foster a more engaging and fulfilling work environment. Joining him is Scott Smith, a strategic chief human resources officer with over 2 decades of experience across global manufacturing landscapes. From leading high-performance work systems to navigating complex mergers and acquisition ventures, Scott's experience is driving cultural change and enhancing employee safety has reshaped the HR function into a pivotal element of business strategy. Together, they'll share their unique perspective on transforming shop floor engagement, drawing from their rich histories of innovation, leadership, and strategic change. So let's dive in and unlock the secrets to a more engaged, productive manufacturing workforce with Jason Lauritsen and Scott Smith. So to start with, I thought I'd have you each introduce your topic and your expertise. So we'll start with Jason.
I have been on a quest, I would say, for the last 20 or 25 years to, how do I describe this? On my better days, I'd say to fix work and make work better for people. On the days when I'm frustrated, it's to make work not suck for people, which really boils down to helping leaders and organizations understand how to create an experience at work that works for people, helps them be their best. And the way that I do that is by teaching them how to do what I call leading with relationships. So that's what I do. I do that through speaking and leadership training and writing and all kinds of different ways.
Excellent. And your new training program isn't public yet, right? Is that
not quite? It will be probably in March.
Okay, great. And so Scott, he has a new whole modules on leading through relationships that I went through as a beta, and it was really quite good. Combination of video and workshop, and you can what I loved about it as a trainer is you can do it a variety of different ways, which I thought was terrific. So
cool. Thanks.
And so Scott, you're like I said, we go way back, but your background has always been in pretty much in the manufacturing sector, and have done a lot of revolutionary things, not to coin a phrase of their company, but revolutionary things in the HR function. So do you want to just give us a quick background on your your position and what you're looking for as an HR executive in manufacturing?
Yeah, sure. It's like you said, Bob, I've been in manufacturing since about 1992, 1993. Various size companies. Started out at a small 100-person veneer plant in central PA, and slowly worked my way up to the corporate headquarters and then to the CHRO role, where I've been for the last 25 years or so. I've had a fortunate rise in my career. I've always looked at HR through probably a non-traditional lens. I see HR's role within companies as really about unleashing the talent, which is about removing obstacles to success. I don't thrive on being the police traffic cop. I reject that role. You certainly have to do it from time to time. That shouldn't be the primary focus of an HR person. That the ancient Greeks defined happiness as using your skills along the lines of excellence. And I think to the extent that the HR people can help allow people to use their skills along those lines, then we're going to succeed not only as individuals, but as corporations. And I've tried to carry that message through of being a people-centered, mission-driven HR function throughout my career.
Fantastic. And you can, so Jason Scott, you can see the overlap here. One from at least from a philosophical perspective, but now trying to, and I guess my attempt here today in this podcast is to kind of bridge the gap and see how what we can teach manufacturing people and what we can teach more on the corporate side, some lessons on employee engagement. So, but I guess, Jason, in your new material and the things, can you kind of walk us through the check-in model and the theory behind that?
Sure. I mean, very simply put, that one of the things that I spent, I've spent a lot of years, like I said, sort of poking around on employee engagement, trying to understand. I'm always looking for sort of the essence, right? The root of things. And I spent 3 years or so with an organization that ran best places to work programs, and I led that and got to sort of see all of this data. We were literally collecting hundreds of thousands of employee survey responses and looking at that. And as we sort of analyzed that year over year, something kind of bubbled up and hit me at one point, which was when you looked at the year over year trends, the drivers of employee engagement, this thing that we're after, it was always things like feeling valued, feeling cared for, trust, appreciation, all of these things. And it really hit me that these aren't things we would traditionally sort of naturally associate with work in the traditional, in the way that we've historically done it. It sounds more like the ways we would describe a relationship and what a relationship does for me or does for us. And so it hit me that work is a relationship. And so then that sort of set me on this quest of like, well, if work is a relationship, what should it look like to make that relationship healthy and optimal so that people can feel comfortable and motivated to do their best? And what that ultimately boiled down to was helping leaders understand that the way to build relationships happens one conversation at a time. One conversation at a time. And so the check-in method is all about helping leaders and managers understand how to most effectively and often sort of most quickly get into the conversations that really matter with their people so that they can build relationships, that they can make sure people have what they need to succeed and perform well, and that they can quickly identify obstacles that are standing in the way of people being able to do their best at work. And so the check-in method is ultimately about tools and approaches and skills needed to have the conversations that matter with your people so that you can build better relationships with them at work and create a better work experience for them.
Excellent. Thank you. Scott, could you give us, and you sent some notes to me yesterday that were great, but kind of walk us through the manufacturing environment and the challenges that faces with trying to have one-on-one conversations and in the midst of everything going on?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Manufacturing's evolved, particularly in the United States, over the last 30 to 40 years. Right, the last vestiges of the Theory X management are finally leaving and parting ways, but yet the economic pressures on manufacturers within the U.S. is higher than ever. And I think there's been an evolution of thought around how do we optimize all of our inputs, and that has now begun to include on a regular basis the people part of it. The talent is an important input. It's not just about raw materials and equipment and machinery and all the rest of it, but getting the most out of our people is really the role of an HR function in my mind. The CFO's in charge of getting the most out of the balance sheet. The engineering department's charged with getting the most out of the equipment, and we're here to help get the most out of the people. So manufacturing, it's hyper competitive globally. So there's extreme pressures to reduce space, reduce inventories, reduce time and process. It's lean manufacturing from beginning to end, which creates smaller, more compact, busier, fewer people who are busier. We become much more automated, so there's not a lot of downtime in between in between tasks and that. So the employees require an extended attention span on equipment, which reduces the opportunities to have conversations with folks. And when you do them, they tend to be short machine gun blasts and directive communication, rather than, as Jason talked about, having real conversations with people. So it's a challenge to find the time and place in which to have those conversations, and you need to tackle it through a variety of means, not just relying on one or two ways of doing it.
Really true. And then we also have, sorry, I've got my dog decided to hear some noises. Cut all that out. But we also have on the shop floor, there's a lot of noise, and then we also have a lot of workers who don't have English as a first language, and then there's just, as you also pointed out, there's a lot of compact space out in the floor, so you can't just huddle somebody over on the side. So, do you have any thoughts, Scott, on alternative ways to have those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, look, our better managers and our better supervisors have pre-shift meetings. We have people come in before the shift starts, so you can kind of huddle them up and do that. The more effective ones do that and take advantage of it. And and again, it's the quality of the conversation. It's not about lining them up and saying, handing out the orders for the day. It's what's going on, what's happening, where's your head at today? Is someone distracted because they got a problem at home? All those things that can pop up. Are they ready to engage on the shop floor or not, and find those things out? So our better managers and supervisors take the time to do that, and that preps them for having the check-ins, if you will, during the shift to do that. But we deployed a number of different tools. We tried employee recognition is kind of the fruit of the day, if you will. Everyone tries they're selling apps and everything else to try and do employee recognition stuff. And we tried a couple different versions that were app based, but what we found was the people who were sitting by a computer used it extensively, but the people out in the shop floor, look, they were not going to take the time to log in to do those things. And a year later, we had spent a lot of money and a lot of effort and a lot of push, and 80% of it was done by people at desks for people at desks, and we completely lost the shop floor in it. And we really had to. I said, look, this isn't working, and I don't like doing things that don't work. Let's just stop the insanity and try something different. So we went back to a different model where we're allowing each supervisor to, we call it a Shining Star program, where they each month for every 10 employees they can issue a Employee of the Month award, and we have them delivered in front of a group of their peers, so they get that public recognition, which I think is important for engagement. And we've gone to TV screens in our facility with short, easily digestible slides on topics that are important to the folks on the shop floor. Are there visitors coming to the plant? How's the plant doing? Is it open enrollment season? Whatever it is, and you got to watch very carefully to make sure those slides don't have the engineering group wants to put a huge spreadsheet in there with 80,000 cells that you couldn't read if you wanted to. So we try to make sure it's no more than like 30 to 40 words on a slide at most, and make them digestible and, most importantly, relevant for the people, because we want them to use those TV slides to get information. So it's great for passive communication, which reduces the need for the supervisors and managers to deliver some of those more routine items, or they're less urgent. We can passively communicate those during break times and lunch times and those things. So it saves the time for the production supervisors and managers to have the more important one-on-one conversations.
Now, Jason, I know you've had you've worked with extensive number of companies, and you've been working on your check-in method and your books and the like. What are some examples of some tough environments to try to implement your check-in method? Have you seen some that were not necessarily manufacturing, but just kind of a challenge all the way around?
I,
or all of them are challenges, I guess?
I think it's a great question. And I think certainly anytime you're talking about, I mean, the thing that complicates all of this is the reality that time is the currency of relationships, right? You cannot build relationships without an investment of time. There is no shortcut. There's no way to jump past that. And so in any case, when you're thinking about relationship building and you're in a situation where time is literally money, or you think of it that way, right? That we're in a zero waste environment and we can't have downtime, and that it's challenging, right? So in manufacturing is an issue. You think about hospitality, restaurants, those kinds of situations, if they're in high traffic, high demand, even healthcare often, right? Where there's high demands on time and you just have to be. And so there's constant motion, and oftentimes in those environments, there's an overriding or underlying belief that we don't have time for this. And I would say, like, it's kind of like you can let's use just a really simple stupid proxy here, but like we're really busy in our lives, right? You think about it in your own lives, you can get really busy. I've got two kids that are involved in all kinds of stuff. My wife and I both are really involved in our work. We could say we don't really have time for conversations. We don't have time to sit down and talk to each other. But what's the consequence of that? I mean, sure, it's time I'm taking away from doing something else. But when we don't spend that time, everything else works less effectively. The relationship starts to deteriorate. And so it's always, I think that's fundamentally where it lies, is that we convince ourselves that there's no time for it. But the reality is we're not investing the time in building that relationship so that then when we're not in those conversations, that work is working better. And so there's a lot of challenging situations, but I don't know. Part of it's environment. A big part of it is, or because you see this in office spaces too, like where they have, I mean, should be easy to sit down and have a meeting, but they've convinced themselves, I am way too busy. I've got 8 direct reports. I've got all these meetings. I don't have time to talk to my people. Right? It can happen anywhere. It's more about the belief of the importance, and are we investing time in those relationships? Are we investing time as an organization in communicating with our people? You heard Scott already talk about that. It's like we're being intentional and thoughtful in creating places and spaces and mechanisms where we can communicate with our people in a way that fits and that helps them feel connected, or helps them feel like they're being communicated with, or in a conversation with the organization even broadly. So a lot of places it's complicated, but it always boils down to just, are we willing to make the time, to invest the time in fostering a relationship with our people?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I agree with everything Jason just said. There's 2 additional items. One is the quality of the conversations is so important. We have an advanced management program we do every year, and during that program, one of the light bulbs that clicked on during the meeting was one of the managers said, "You know what? I just realized I talk with my subordinate literally 5 to 6 days a week every week, but I don't have conversations with them." They were all transactional oriented. We got to get this workout, or this shipment's coming, or we got to do that. And it was a really powerful moment to see that light bulb click on with someone. He says, I'm in the office next door. I talk to him all the time, but we don't have conversations. And that was really powerful. And Jason, you talked about this relationship building, and foundational to that is establishing and keeping your trust amongst your team, right? You don't partner with people you don't trust, and and if you don't trust the person you're communicating with, you're going to narrow down what you share with somebody. And so the depth and the quality of those conversations need to be actively managed right out of the gate. And just, it's not a vaccine. It's not one shot and you're done. You got to manage that credibility every day. every month, every year that you're out there. And I think those things enhance what you're talking about, Jason.
Agreed.
Like going way back in history to the Ken Blanchard, some of Ken Blanchard's stuff, he talks about it takes a long time to build trust, and then you can have one moment where it bankrupts it, and then you have to start all over again. And I think that having kind of that check-in mindset helps you maintain the fluids level, if you will, of the uh, of the bank of trust that you build up. Um,
Yeah,
Jason, do you have a couple of examples? Go ahead. I'm sorry, Scott.
no, I mean, look, one of the definitions of trust is it's a pattern of predictable behavior,
Mm,
which is what the frequency of those check-ins would allow you to do, right? If you establish that rhythm of consistent, open, clear, powerful, poignant communications with folks, that will build that trust. That is trust. I know that if I have this conversation, this will be the response. And I think that's also important for people to be cognizant of. What is trust? Right?
hmm Absolutely. Um, Jason, could you give us kind of a quick summary of the check-in, the kinds of questions that you kind of support or encourage people to take in the check-in method? Because it's pretty simple yet pretty profound. That's
Sure.
just part of why I was attracted to it.
Well, so let me back up a second before I get to the questions. In that, one of the most powerful things that you can teach a manager, and I'll be interested in Scott's reaction to this because I suspect this will align similarly probably to what you have taught or coached, is what I recognized is the reality is, we think that a meaningful conversation has to take a lot of time. And so that's why when we do these little flybys, we just fly by, we talk at people, or we ask a question. We don't really stick around to listen to the answer, and we're off to the next one because I've got 10 more people to do a flyby and talk at. And it doesn't have to be that way. We can get to a meaningful conversation fairly quickly, but you've got to be committed to kind of there's a beginning, and then there's a middle, and there's an end. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes long. It can be 5 minutes long, but you've got to be committed to these steps. And there's 4 steps of any effective check-in conversation to have it feel meaningful for the person on the other side of it. And here's the 4 steps. Number 1, ask a great question. And a great question is a question that any question that you can ask that essentially demands a follow-up question. And so, Bob, you've heard me do this in the past, but what's the most common check-in question we ask people?
Mm-hmm.
How are you? Right? I mean, that's what we do. Or how are you? How you been? And what do people say? They say, fine, good, decent, okay, whatever it is, busy, one word. Where do I go with that? That tells me nothing. And honestly, oftentimes the person asking just goes, okay, I'm off the hook. I can move on. And so you need to ask a question that demands a follow-up. So I'll come back to that in a second to address your question, Bob, about what are great questions. You ask a great question that demands a follow-up. Then you ask the follow-up. Then once you ask the follow-up question, that's where the real value of the conversation opens up. Then you listen like your life depends on it. Or more directly, I tell leaders, shut up. Shut up. Because if you're going to do the work of having these check-ins, it's after you ask that follow-up question when they will tell you the thing that you need to know or want to know. You listen, maybe ask a couple other follow-ups to try to understand, and then you close it out by offering support or encouragement. Simple. 4 steps. So let's go back to the top. Ask a great question. How are you? Not a great question. Why? Because it doesn't demand a follow-up. Now you can take that, the question I teach most regularly or commonly is that you can take that question, or really any question, and make it a great question with a very simple tweak. And the tweak is, I stopped by to see Bob, and I'm like, Bob, how are you today? Let's say on a scale from 1 to 10. 10 couldn't be better, 1 couldn't be worse. Where are you at? You're going to say whatever you say. a 7, a 2, a 10, a 1, a 5. I don't care what you say. But the thing is, it's very easy for you to answer it. Single syllable in most cases, 2 syllables if we're getting really crazy. But then what that does is like, well, I can't just walk away at that point. You're like, well, I'm a 5. It's like, all right, well, good check-in, good talk. I'm off to the next one. You're going to have to ask. So you have to ask the follow-up. Well, then the follow-up is, 5. Well, sounds like a mixed bag, right? Sounds like you're kind of in the middle. Like, tell me what's on the positive side. Like what's moving it up to a 5? What's going well? And you might say, well, something about whatever. It might be something to do with your kids or your spouse, or it could be something like I bowled a 270 last night. I'm feeling pretty good. But whatever that is, doesn't matter. You're learning about them. You're connecting. They're talking about what matters to them. Boom. That's it. Put that in the good column. Then you say, and this is my favorite part of this, is like, what's the gap between 5 and 10? Like what's moving you, what's keeping you at a 5, or what would move you closer to a 10? And then they'll be like, well, really tired. I haven't been sleeping well because of blah, 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 blah. Or I'm really struggling with this thing or this coworker or whatever, right? They tell you whatever that thing is. Listen, right? This is where it's really important you listen, because when you ask that follow-up question, that's when you get to the good stuff. And that can happen in 45 seconds, 30 seconds, right? You're right into it. And then after they tell you, it's like, okay, demonstrate support. So it could be as simple as saying, well, what could I do to help? Right? That's a simple thing. Or my favorite thing, this comes from Brene Brown, so I'm ripping it off from her, but it's such a great way of responding is, hey, what would support look like for me right now for you? And sometimes they're like, I don't know. Sometimes, and it's like, okay, that's great. Just know I'm here to support. If there's something I can do to help, let me know. Sometimes whatever they say, there's nothing you can fix or do. You're not their therapist. You're not going to go deal with their kids, but just being able to talk about it and know that you care can be enough. That now that's like, okay, now I can focus on work for the next 8 hours or 10 hours of my shift, whatever it is. And so that's the mechanics of it. So great questions can be, just at the end of a shift, like, how do you feel your shift went today from 1 to 10? Or how appreciated do you feel generally about the work you do here on a scale from 1 to 10? It doesn't add 1 to 10 to any of those things that you care about, and you'll be quickly into a really meaningful conversation. And then it's just, you got to listen, be curious and listen, and then offer support. So that's how the check-in fundamentally works.
Yeah, I think the one thing that you imply through all that message is, and it's very critical, is authenticity. You have to be authentic, right? And you can't put on a false face that you don't have. If you're not smiling and laughing 80% of the day, don't approach those conversations in that way. If you're serious minded and more thoughtful and contemplative, come across that way. But be yourself and be authentic with them, because people can smell a phony a mile away. And if you underline that process you outline with genuine authenticity, which I guess is kind of redundant, but if you do that, it's going to be much more powerful, right?
Totally agree. And I would offer that, I guess that's a great assumption to call out, is that if you don't genuinely care about your people, if you don't genuinely care about them being successful, not because it's necessarily just about your team metrics or whatever, but if you don't genuinely care about your people and supporting them, then all of this is going to be really, really hard.
That's
you
right.
probably shouldn't be in management in the first place, right? If you don't care. And if you happen to be, then boy, it is really hard to fake it and be effective. So that's an excellent point, Scott.
Jason, do you have some examples? I remember on one of your other podcasts, you talked a little bit about some examples of really like profound impact on an employee when they experience the check-in method.
Well, one I was thinking about is, and I think so, the check-in method involves a whole bunch of different kinds of these conversations, right? The structure is always the same. The 4 steps are always generally the same, but there's a variety of different approaches. And one of the check-in tools or approaches that I think are most powerful is one called the clarity check-in. And we had someone from one of my courses that learned this process, took it back, was an HR leader, took it back, and then we got a follow up from her several weeks later, where she was talking about how she it was two different cases, but one in particular, she had a manager and an employee that were at an impasse. Like they just could not get along. And it was to the point where this employee was getting ready to leave, and they were putting pressure on the manager because they're like, why can't you figure this out? It was like really tense. And she took this check-in, this clarity check-in back, used it with the two of them. And she's like, it literally in the course of a meeting, found the root cause of the issue, and they're now moving forward. We're going to save this employee, their relationship's getting better. And fundamentally, here's the simplest version of what this looks like is it instead of a single question at the beginning, and I guess it is a single question, but basically the clarity check-in is a process where you basically, as a manager, you ask the employee, it's all about alignment to make sure the person is clear about what's expected of them. So it's because oftentimes that's in my experience, a majority of employee performance issues boil down to the fact that the employee is not clear about what's expected, and therefore their behavior or performance doesn't align, but it's because they don't even know. And so then it's surprising when they get feedback, and then that's disheartening and frustrating and all the things. And so you start with clarity. And so it's basically asking the employee to think about and come to a short conversation prepared to talk about the top 3 things that they believe are most important to success in their role. You can ask it that way. You can ask it like, what are the 3 most important measures of success in your role? And then as a manager, you think about the same thing, write down what you believe it is, like you note what those 3 are. And then when you get together for that check-in, that's where you start. So what 3 things do you see as most important, or do you think is most important? And then you share yours. And basically it's a calibration. And what you will find, even if you're a pretty good manager, is you'll find that very often the 2 lists don't align. And when you have a misalignment and clarity about expectations, everything else after that is harder. Clarity is where everything starts. And so she said, like, it had transformed this one relationship. She had another relationship. She talked about how it had turned around employee performance simply by making sure the employee was clear about what was expected. And and the manager learning, like, well, where's that coming from? How did you pick up that that's what was expected? And that was a huge learning moment for the manager too, about how to do a better job with communicating. So that's an example of how it can work, right? So you start with that as your great question, you ask the follow-ups, and then at the end, obviously, they align and they come to, here's the 3, and then the employee walks out clear and ready to go perform. So that's an example.
Yeah, and just to add to that, one of the things that I've learned over my career is that, and they actually taught this at Harvard Business School when I was there for the HR program. The professor said this, and it's funny how one line can just rattle through your brain. And the one line was, in the absence of clear communication, all ambiguous actions are interpreted negatively. And boy, there's nothing truer than that. And I teach at our advanced management program. It doesn't matter if you're painting the parking lot, or if you're changing out the vending machines, or if you're buying a new equipment line. If you do not get out in front of that and communicate clearly, with that clarity you talked about, Jason, everything's going to take on a negative tone. And and then that's also punctuated by this idea of one of the better cultural attributes I've heard a CEO talk about is he insists on a presumption of good faith between everyone when you have those conversations, right? Presume that the other person you're talking to is operating with good intention and good faith and all that. Those 2 things combined, if you bring that presumption of good faith and you have that very, very clear communication at all times, it sets a great foundation for everything that you're trying to get done, right?
It sure does. And I would absolutely echo that. I talk about both of those things too, on my end too. The first thing you described there, that my simple version of this, the way that I describe this or understand it, is as human beings, when in doubt, we assume the worst.
Mm-hmm.
And it
That's
is
right.
fundamentally true. And when you get that, then that's why a lack of clarity is so dangerous. It's culturally toxic. It will undermine engagement and performance, everything. And it's just human nature, And it's so easy to defeat if you just invest in clarity. And on the second side of that, the way I think about that or describe that to people is I often, when I'm teaching, I ask people, and I know this is sometimes the cynical manager doesn't like this question, but I'm like, have you ever met somebody who you believe gets up in the morning every day thinking, boy, I hope I fail today? Right? I've never met a human being that I believe that is true for. I've met human beings who I think because of the sum of their experiences are in a very difficult place and they're getting in their own way and they're self-destructive, but that wasn't a choice they made. It was something that happened. And so I think that if you fundamentally believe that every person would choose success over failure, given the means and opportunity to do so, and that wherever they're at, they're doing the best they can on that given day, when you show up for a person believing that as a leader or a manager, whatever you do after that is more likely to be helpful. And for some reason, and I'm sure you see this all the time, Scott, with leaders or managers, it's our assumptions about people actually draw out the worst in them because we almost expect them to do the wrong thing, right? If you bring that kind of energy to a team as a leader, you're gonna actually invite that out. Like, people respond to your expectations.
Yeah, they're going to perform to the level of your expectations.
Yep.
There's no question
Mm-hmm.
about that, right? And I always tell people, look, it's okay to be skeptical. It's not okay to become cynical,
Yeah.
right? And draw the line there, right? Because it's easy to fall into cynicism.
People want to know you believe in them.
That's right.
Yeah, I was using a model that talks about behavior above and below the line, and we define below the line as everything from being cynical to unprofessional talk, bad language, the whole bit, and you kind of get people to acknowledge that and say, let's talk about above the line, which is leadership issues of find a problem, fix the problem, those kinds of things. And what has turned out to be quite powerful is that managers and leaders then can just simply say, "Hey, let's get it above the line." Like take your conversation and think more broadly as a leader. And my graphic has just a black line across the page and says, "Let's move it above the page." And it's just like a wake up call. Oh yeah, I guess we can do that. So, Scott, do you have some of the examples of people really engaging in the check-in method or the an engagement method for in the revolution world? Have some examples of that, or good managers that engage with their employees?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Our plant in Little Rock, for example, we have a manager who, by all external views, you would think would be more of a Theory X type of guy. But you know what? He makes sure he interviews every single employee comes into that plant. And on the first day, he makes sure he sits down and talks with them and has a good conversation and starts out the relationship that way. And builds that, because most of them aren't expecting to hear from the plant manager, right? Because that's 3 layers up from who they deal with every day,
Mm-hmm.
and that's an example of someone taking time to get things off to a great start. And I think that's probably reflective of his experiences and backgrounds. Of we model the behavior that we aspire to, or that we've learned from, and I think he's done that. I think that's one terrific example of it. I'm trying to think of a couple other quick examples, but boy, I got to be honest, Bob, I'm drawing a little bit of a blank right now on that
That's
one.
okay.
I have it, we just can't draw the good ones out.
It was kind of a spur of the moment question.
Yeah.
I couldn't read it. But Jason, I know in some of the material that I went through on the check-in method, you've talked about that issue of modeling behavior
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that you're showing your leadership capabilities and your empathy to and listening to other people, because people watch that. They absolutely watch that. Um, can you expand upon that a little bit about how did you come up with those key points? I think you have 7 C's that you've listed in your training. How did that all evolve?
It was really through I'm kind of the way that I think about my work, or the quest that I've been on, is sort of both a research exploration, right? Looking for,
Mm-hmm.
trying to identify, both through research that I've been involved in and research that other people have done, what works, and interpreting that and bringing that back. And oftentimes it's in sort of putting it in the context of helping people understand it in a way that makes more sense to them or feels more applicable. And then through my own experience as a leader, my own experience, being in corporate HR for 10 years and being in sales before that, and working in a whole bunch of different organizations of all kinds of different sizes. There's things that, prove out to be true. And you talk to people about what works and what doesn't, and what they like and what they don't like, and what's helpful and not. And you marry that with the research. And one of the most fundamental truths that I think is important organizationally, but it's important, I think, societally and community and families or whatever, is that, people will believe or hear far more loudly what you do than what you say. And so often in organizations, I get so frustrated. And to Scott's point about authenticity, right? We now more than ever in history, people have like a finely tuned BS detector, right? We have to. We're getting to a place in time where we're not even going to be able to believe like videos that we see of someone that looks like, AI is completely. So we have to take our BS detectors to new levels. And so if you as a leader are saying to me that integrity is one of our core values, and you're giving me a speech about this, but then I see you. You're telling me that as a manager, I should be having these one-on-one meetings with my people, or I should be coaching people because HR told you to read that script, and yet I don't experience that with you. Then everything falls apart, and that's what I think has been a real historic issue around employee engagement is. And I think what makes it so important that we really focus in on supporting our middle managers is because there's this sort of thing that's happened over the years where executives have become really interested in employee engagement. They've understand that if our people are engaged, they perform at a higher level, they stick around, they're better advocates, all of this. But when they think of employee engagement, they think of frontline employees. So a lot of pressure goes goes through HR and goes on to managers to make sure those frontline employees are engaged. But guess who they're not spending a lot of time thinking about engagement with? That's their middle managers. So the middle managers are getting it like from the top down. You're responsible for engaging our people. The employees sort of feel this. They're pushing all their issues up to the manager. You got managers in the middle, and nobody's coming to talk with them about their engagement. And then we wonder why it breaks down.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well,
I
if
remember.
this is so important, how come nobody's coming and talking to me about my engagement? How come nobody's coming and having these one-on-one check-ins with me? And right, so that it really falls apart in the middle if we're not really understanding that it has to start from the very top. And because we look up and we see what they're doing, and if you're telling me to do something that I don't see the top of the organization doing, then I know you don't really mean it. So all I have to do is keep my head down and wait long enough for this trend to pass.
I remember first day at a new company, and of course, the CEO said, "Look, Scott, we want you to come in and change the culture." Which I hear that speech every time, every interview I've ever been on. We want you to take control of the culture. And I remember I was going through the plant. This is the first day in the job, walking around, and I go over to the wall by the employee area, and it had a big sign up. It said, basically, "Attention! If your paycheck's wrong, and it's your fault, you'll get your correction in 2 weeks. And if it's our fault, you'll get it next week. And I went over and I ripped that down. I went over to the CEO and I said, here's the example of your culture problem. He goes, what are you talking about? It's a payroll issue. I said, no, it's not. I said, what this is, it sends three messages. One is obviously your payroll processes are out of control. Two, you don't care if your employees get paid or not. And three, you're brazen enough to advertise it. Right? Those are the three messages you're sending, right? And I immediately changed that. I took it down and said, we'll fix the paychecks. And look, if we have a problem with the supervisors or the time clocks or whatever it is, we'll fix those things. But we're not going to make the employees the business end of the boogie whip on the thing. Right? And just little things like that. That was a heavily dark, unionized environment that was so embittered. But we turned that culture around slowly but surely. But it's things like that are sentinel moments that they just thought it was no big deal. I said, but you take a step back, it just slaps you in the face. Look, wow, we don't care if you get paid or not, right? Because that's in a sense what that said.
It's a great example.
Yep. Yeah, it really is. Really is. We're coming up on time here, so I just wanted to kind of do a quick wrap up. Scott, do you have any final insights or takeaways that you'd like to share from this?
No, I mean, look, I think Jason, look, I think what you're talking about is all the right things. There's foundational things that companies need to have in place to support these efforts, because if it's not, it's going to fall apart. It's going to be the program of the month. I loved your comment about, look, if you really don't care about your employees, you shouldn't be managing people to begin with. And that's fine. There are people just don't have those empathy genes. That's fine. Go work in a process somewhere, work in an individual contributor role. There's people that excel at those things, and we need people like those things. But you're not necessarily designed to be a leader of people. And, some people can change, but look, generally they're not going to. They're not going to develop those genes unless something dramatic happens in their life to show them the way, if you will. So I think the foundational parts of it are important, and I think it also has to be dynamic. What's going on in your company? And are you headed for a growth? Are you headed for a retraction? And providing that clarity and keeping these programs consistent and real and alive. Like I said, it's not a vaccination. It's not a one-time shot and everything's good forever. You have to go back and revisit it every single time and keep it germane to what's going on in your company or your plant or your department at that point in time, I think are probably the key thing.
Yeah, excellent. Jason, do you have any wrap-ups, takeaways, final, like if all else fails, remember this?
Yeah, I think the two quick things I'll offer. One is that you make sure that when you're thinking about what you're going to ask of your managers, so if you're going to ask them to be doing these check-ins, if you're going to ask them to be, making time to connect with their people differently, you have to support that structurally. You have to support that from a process, because people will do exactly what you pay them to do, right? They understand how they're paid. So if you're telling them, you're saying, I want you to spend more time talking with your people, having these conversations, and yet I get incented and measured and paid on my percent of utilization at being at 99% or whatever. Like, I'm not taking people off the floor to have a conversation. I'm not, I'm just not going to do it, because that's not what you're paying me. You can say whatever you want. I understand how I'm paid. And so you have to structurally support people. This has to be part of how you do business, how you run your business, how you run your floor, how you run your shop, whatever it is. So that's number one. The second thing I would say is, when I used to travel around, when I was doing the best places to work business, it's like people would ask, like, what's the one piece of advice that you give organizations about how to become a best place to work, or how to drive employee engagement? And I'm like, it's pretty simple. You need to, like, the best places to work, all of them without fail, are in constant conversation with people in some way. It can be broadly through surveys or through whatever, but they're constantly doing this thing where they ask people how it's going and how work is working for them. They get feedback, they hear the feedback, they take some action on the feedback to make it better. Rinse and repeat forever. And so it's as simple as, so if you're not at a point that you can sort of pivot towards getting your managers having these check-ins more in-depth, more frequently because of structural issues, then find a way to have a conversation with your employees more broadly, like employee survey tools, quick little like pulses or check-ins, like when someone's clocking in or clocking out, having a question pop up that asks them for some feedback on how their shift was or what the organization can do to help them be more effective. Listen to that feedback, take action on that feedback, tell people that you heard and took action on their feedback, and go back. That is the most powerful thing you can do to improve quickly.
Great. Wow, this has been a wonderful session. Thank you both. I always walk away from sessions like this kind of reinvigorated and like ready to go out and develop some more engagement with my clients and help them do that. So thank you all. I will send you a draft of this as soon as I get it edited, and we'll take it from there. But again, my thanks to Jason Lauritsen and Scott Smith. Thank you for a wonderful hour of conversation, and we'll talk to you guys real soon. Thank you.
Jason, it was a pleasure.
Likewise, Scott. Thanks for the work you do. I'm always like, I talk all the time and whatever. I have deep admiration for those of you that are like you, that are in there and are doing it and making it work, making it happen. Cause it's hard work and getting harder, I think. And so I appreciate what you do.
Great.
Good. Thank you, gentlemen. Talk to you soon.
Right.
That concludes today's inLearning webcast entitled Unlocking Shop Floor Engagement. Our special thanks to our guests, Jason Lauritsen and Scott Smith. You can reach Jason through his website, jasonlauritsen.com, and Scott can be contacted through his LinkedIn page at @OneScottSmith. Be sure to visit our website at inlearning.us for more information on our offerings and our case studies. Thanks again.